Hi, I'm Mark Beck, Research Director for AI with the Futurum Group. Welcome to the AI Moment. It's our weekly podcast that explores the latest developments in enterprise AI, and we are literally having a moment. And the pace and the change of innovation in AI is unprecedented. I've been covering AI since 2016. I've never seen anything like what we've experienced since ChatGPT was launched late in 2022 and kickstarted the generative AI era. With the AI Moment podcast, we try to distill this mountain of information, separate the real from the hype, and provide you with sure-handed analysis about where the AI market is headed. We deep dive into the latest trends, technologies are shaping the AI landscape, and we'll cover things from analyzing the latest developments in technology to parsing the mutating vendor landscape, also AI regulations, ethics, risk management, and a lot more. Usually it's about 30 minutes, usually a little less. It's typically made up of 3 or 4 segments, not always all of them, sometimes just one of them. And today we're going to do what I call the key trends segment of generative AI. And the title today is Watermarking and Other Strategies for Licensing AI Training Data and Combating Malicious Generated Content, or other words, fake news. So generative AI there's kind of 2 issues that have really sprung to the forefront as we keep moving through 2023 and into 2024. And there are 2. One, there's this idea around malicious AI generated content, deep fakes, misinformation, fake news, that kind of thing. Second idea and second issue that we're dealing with, they're related, are around copyrighted content, and the rights of those copyright holders in that content, and the data that they generate being used for AI training. And that best known right now is the New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI. So let's talk about those issues for a little bit, and then what I've got is a few examples of where we've gone, where we've been, where we're headed, and maybe what's going to happen next. So the issues, right? There's a lot more worry right now, particularly around deepfakes and fake news and misinformation, because 2024, there are 50 national elections that are going to happen across the globe. And, media companies in particular are working to look at this. And I will say it's not necessarily out of the goodness of their heart. There is a lot of liability issues around this as well. So, not being forced by their governments to do anything necessarily. They are taking action. And I think it's because of the risk that they're involved with possibly being sued or other awful things like that. And so the second issue is if you think about where we first started with generative AI, and the real big use cases were around image generation, text generation, and assistance, right? And those outputs that they give are trained on, a lot of times, copyrighted data from content producers. So there's this evolving thinking, and there was some original thoughts around how do you protect that copyrighted data, that copyrighted content, whether it's blocking it out completely or receiving compensation for it. So that's where we're going. So let's talk about what's happened over time real quick. So when it first started happening, so the issues are related, okay, and I'm going to talk about them interspersed, but here's what sort of happened. When all of this started to churn up middle of last year, the media did a few things. So there were 3 things that happened. The media started through a negotiation process, and the first ones that kind of started that process were News Corporation in around the June timeframe. It came to light that they were negotiating with some of the AI vendors. They didn't specifically say who, about compensation for using their data to train AI models. Another one was Axel Springer. came up around the same time. So that's one way to do this, is to just have media companies grant permission to use license that content, at least media content that they control, to license it is something they can do. That doesn't stop the deep faking, but it does help with the training. The second part has to do with lawsuits, and there's been a few in and out. Sarah Silverman, as a content producer, is sued. Some artists that aren't as well known is sued as collectively in a class lawsuit. And then there's the most famous one right now is the New York Times. So you can sue, right, and see if you can either, one, force an issue to get compensation for when things are trained, or to keep those AI companies from training on the data. So you've got negotiations and lawsuits as two things, but really what we're going to talk about mostly today are technical solutions. So there's been an evolving idea around technical solutions that really started with a germ of an idea, started with what was called the News Province Project. It was launched by IBM and New York Times. And so they were thinking about that. That was this early attempt to fight disinformation, misinformation, by using a blockchain-made digital watermark. That group launched that initiative in July of 2019. But it's really, since then, it's gone dormant. I haven't seen any more news about them lately, and I think it might have morphed into what I'm going to talk about next, which is the Content Authenticity Initiative. And this is a movement or initiative or group that was led or initiated by Adobe. And they use a similar idea. They use cryptographic asset hashtagging, or hashing. So it's a digital watermark for images and metadata, and they have a lot of things going on. One thing they're working on now are actually some standards around that. What's interesting there is the members include a lot of big media companies, AP, BBC, Axel Springer, Gannett, the New York Times, you keep hearing that name, Reuters, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. And there's also these image companies, so they're not known as AI vendors, but they sort of are, which is Adobe, which has created their own products like Firefly for creating images. But Adobe is obviously leading it, but in there with them are Getty Images and Shutterstock. So there's nothing so far in that initiative around digital watermarking that addresses text. Okay, so set that aside. So now those were started in last year, early. The News Province Project was old. Last year, you got the CAI moving forward. This year, there's been, and really actually in the last few weeks, there's been a couple of movements we're going to talk about. So these developments are emerging. So the first one is Google, and Google has some stuff going on that's interesting. So in December, around the 19th, well, it was the 19th of December, I wrote a research note about this. Susan Jasper, who's the vice president of their trust and safety solutions at Google, she publishes a blog post, outlines what Google's got going on to combat, and this is how they phrase it, combat misuse and abuse of Google products and services, particularly those leveraging generative AI. And they noted in their piece that this was really urgent to them because of the cycles we're coming through with the elections. Right. So here's what they've got going on. This is kind of interesting to me. They said, with the recent advances in their LLMs, Google has been experimenting with building what they said faster, more adaptable enforcement systems for they have long-standing policies and software that they use for content filtering and identifying and removing content. They were actually using AI to do that before. They said they were AI classifiers, but now they're using generative AI to make that a better process. So that was the first thing to mention. I thought it was cool. And that they are prioritizing their testing for safety risks. And it's everything from cybersecurity to the misinformation and fairness of these generative AI products. So they mentioned specifically Bard and the search generative experience, which is their project for kind of next generation web search. So they said they're prioritizing safety tests for that. Then this one's non AI. Well, this is the biggest news they said that day was they are restricting the type of election related queries that Bard and SGE, the search generative experience, could return responses on. So in other words, they're limiting those two generative AI tools from literally not answering questions about the elections, which is kind of interesting. It seems like a heavy-handed thing, but I think that's interesting given that they really can't control these things as well as they'd like to. So why not just turn it off? Makes sense. It was a mature thing to say and do. So a few other things they're doing. Some are related to AI, and some are not. They require election advertisers to disclose when their ads include synthetic content that's realistic, that's been either digitally altered or generated, including by AI tools. It's interesting. All right, so next there's YouTube is requiring creators to disclose when they've created these realistic, altered, or synthetic content. They have to display a label that indicates for people that are watching that content they're watching is synthetic. So that was interesting. It's a few other things. They really did a lot in this announcement. So a few other things. They have a feature which is called About This Result, which is in SGE, the search generative experience. And what it does is it provides context about this result. And they do it in Bard as well. And it enables people to evaluate whether there's content across the web that substantiates Bard's English language response. It's kind of interesting. They have About This Image, which is similar in search, and it helps people understand this credibility of the context of the images found that they see. And their last piece they actually did announce this one back in it's kind of late, fourth quarter. It's called Synth ID, and this is kind of interesting. It's in beta, and it's a piece that's being offered by Google DeepMind that is a digital watermarking tool. So it embeds these digital watermarks into AI-generated images and audio. So hold that, because we're going to talk about that on the next part. So when you hear all of those pieces that Google's doing, I thought there was some interesting pieces that I'll talk about these individually instead of collectively. So what that meant to me is, here's Google, got a lot at risk, the world's largest search engine. They are an AI leader. And they really had this, at least they're in a position to have a very big impact on these election cycles for 2024. So it may, taking Bard and SGE out of this election equation was really a leadership move, which I mentioned a little earlier. I think that was not made easily. If you understand how much political advertising means to most companies, I found some estimates that 2024, they believe that digital ads, just in the U.S. alone for 2024 political advertising, digital ads in the U.S. will reach about $1.2 billion. So they're not going to be, those products that Google has aren't going to be that responsible for all of that, but they would be missing a portion of it. So Google's willing to forego that to ensure the safety. Um, and so, that idea that these products could really spread disinformation or misinformation is a bigger issue for them, and it outweighed the revenue upside. So maybe one thing from that, I hope that other players that are in that kind of space will think about that as well, and maybe make some other moves to maybe join Google's leadership of kind of just blocking these tools for now until we figure this out. And the other part to this was thinking about how they are looking at this traceable, how to trace content, right? And this is range of strategies to identify, right? So you had the ad disclosures, the content labels about this result, about this image, and synth ID. And so it's interesting, that they are thinking about these things, and it's playing into a trend I think we're going to see going forward. Whether that costs money or not, we'll see, right? So that's Google made some interesting moves and a pretty comprehensive take on what they're doing. The second one, we've got two others to talk about, was a very recent announcement. It was actually this week, the 9th, that Fox Corporation made with, and they actually, the announcement came from a small company called Polygon Labs. And it was on January 9th that Polygon Labs announced that Fox was going to publicly release a beta version of this thing they call Verify. I caution you, there's a lot of people use this word verify as the name of a product. So there's actually a product from, or a mechanism from the CAI called Verify as well. It's not that. This is Polygon Fox's Verify. And what it is, it's a open source protocol that's meant to establish the history and the origin of registered media. And it's built on a protocol built from Polygon. So the details of that were kind of interesting. You have what they're saying it'll do is that publishers can register content on Verify in order to prove the origination. Individual pieces of the content are cryptographically signed on chain. So that's wording that Polygon's using, but basically it's blockchain technology, like we heard about from both CAI and from Google. Well, Google didn't say that actually. But blockchain, and it allows the consumers to identify content from trusted sources using this tool. So again, I look at this, I can say, okay, I can verify that it's from a legitimate source and not created by someone not saying who they are. And the beta for this was launched by Fox in August, and they did it around the first Fox News GOP debate, and they published some statistics which I thought was interesting. So since that date, they've had 89,000 pieces of content that span text and images that have been signed to Verify, and they came from different sources of Fox News, Fox Business, Fox Sports, and Fox TV affiliates. So that was just kind of a neat thing that they shared, that so much of this, a lot of it's been shared so far. So it's now going to be open sourced, which is an interesting idea as well. And it was developed in-house by Fox Technology. It's built by this protocol by Polygon. So that's kind of the basics of that. And it kind of does this basically. It establishes a way for these media companies to work with LLMs and other AI platforms. And what it does, they have a thing called a verified access point, and that creates this new thing, which is a new commercial opportunities for content owners to kind of build these smart contracts to set up what they call programmatic conditions to access content. In other words, this is a way to license your digital content to LLMs translation, right? So interesting about this, kind of my breakdown on that was that this is the latest, like we said, was the latest move of anyone as far as this goes. You're seeing these kind of trends are kind of lining up as similar, and I looked at it from two angles and just broke it down in our thing. How does it combat malicious? How good it will be at doing that, and what it means in the licensing piece. So in the malicious AI generated content piece, you know, this is addition to content filtering. So filtering has been out there for a bit. It doesn't, but content filtering doesn't necessarily discern whether content is AI generated or not. Just looks for, misused, inappropriate content. So it's different in that case. And when you look at the drivers, like I said for Fox, I mentioned this up at the top. I think that this is important. It could be a liability, right? So we mentioned that having malicious content that's related or possibly related to these media companies is a liability for them. They could get sued. So that's one driver for Fox and these media companies to do it. But the second might be that it's possible that Fox might build this verify into ancillary products around it that they could sell. So part of it's open source and other media companies can use it, but maybe they build some tooling around verify and make some money selling this kind of technology to other media companies. That's one thing. The bigger part is back to this copyright piece that they talked about, this licensing. So I think this is a bigger deal. And one thing I found that was interesting that TechCrunch interviewed the CTO of Fox, and she said this when she was talking to them about Verify. She said, Verify is also a technical on-ramp for AI platforms to license publisher content with encoded controls via smart contracts for LLM training or real-time use cases. We're in discussion with several media companies and expect to be able to share more soon on that front. So they're going to sell this to those media companies, not for the bigger idea would be to license content and protect content, right? So I think that's interesting, and what move forward with that whole piece. Now the last one we're going to talk about is totally different in a way because it is not it's not a commercial product, but it's actually a research breakthrough. So on January 3rd, a group of Chinese researchers, most of them are based in China. One is not. He's of Chinese descent, but he was based here in the U.S. Researchers from universities. They published a paper called Text Watermarking, right? And it was brought to my attention by the CTO of, his name is Raphael Mansour. He's the CTO of Elixon, and he's been one of the people I watch and writes about these things. And this is just an interesting, his synopsis. There's a bit I'd like to tell you about from what he said about this. So he says, what is text watermarking and why does it matter? So in simple terms, text watermarking is this subtly altering text to embed a digital watermark that contains identifiable information. So it works the same as it did for image or video files, right? And it allows the text's origin or authorship or intended use to be tracked. At the same time, text readability is preserved, and obviously it has powerful implications when we're looking at things like copyright protection, source tracking, which we've talked about, and securing sensitive data, and all those other pieces that we think are drivers for why these things are moving forward. How it works, I'll give you a real quick, he gave a synopsis about that. Two approaches. You can do watermarking for existing text, and you can do watermarking for AI models. So I'll give you a real quick look at that. So for existing text, it involves making these kind of very subtle modifications is how you insert a watermark. So it's a format change. They do a little bit of alternate spacing or Unicode points, a couple other pieces. So they say you can do this, and actually you don't have to start from scratch. You could go back to content that's already there and watermark it. And the second one, he talked about watermarking for AI models. And he said what this means is you can do, we said data set modification. So you can add specifically watermarked data samples. And you can do generative process alteration, which is biasing model outputs during text generation. And so the idea here is that a watermarked model will naturally output watermarked text. So take that for what it is and just say that what happens from that point is we're saying, wherever you want to play that, let's say that content owners now have these tools for themselves. They have tools for starting to look cryptographic blockchain to do image and video digital watermarking. You have this idea, and at least a paper that says you can do that with text as well. So where does that lead us? It means that back to our original premise, and what may happen is that we're going to see content owners start to, on their own, work through digital watermarking of all their content. And either they're looking for compensation or the way to block those things from being used. And it does a dual purpose thing. So they're doing that. It not only helps protect their IP and copyright and gives us a bunch of interesting things to do when we can trace data that's being used for training. That's an interesting piece as well. So it gives them protection over their stuff. It may give them the choice of either being compensated by those AI players that want to use that data, or the option that it doesn't get used. So since the digital watermarking is there, they get that choice. And then I think the byproduct of all this is when we're able to use those digital watermarking pieces, and for those purposes, it helps fight deep fakes and all the the bad, the fake news and the misinformation and so it's a dual purpose, right? It's really going after two things. It's great. So that's where we are. This is going to evolve, keep moving. I'll keep an eye on it. I think it's going to be fascinating to see what happens, because this does impact a lot of the business models and the structures for using AI going forward. It's going to be a key piece of it, so we'll keep watching it. So that's my show for the week. Excuse me, our show for the week. I thank you for joining me. Be sure to subscribe or rate and review the podcast on your preferred platform. We're on lots of different places, including YouTube. So thank you again. We'll see you next time.